Hi everyone. I hope all of you are able to hear me. We'll get started very quickly. Just give me maybe 1 minute to check if we are live on YouTube. And I'm going to be taking all the questions that you have with respect to CUET PG in today's session. We'll talk about how the paper was, what the probable cutoffs would be for the various programs that TIS has to offer. So if there are any questions, feel free to put it in the chat window. Also, let us know your attempts, right? So that's a very important thing. It will help us in estimating the cutoffs a little better. Of course, we have done our estimation in terms of what the cutoff will be, but it will be good to know how many questions did you guys attempt and what was your accuracy, right? So you can just let us know through the chat window. Uh, okay, I'm looking at the chat. Okay, hi, everyone. Okay, all right. So let's get started with the analysis. And CUET PG, of course, happened today and we are specifically talking about the question paper code COQP12, which is what the Tata Institute of Social Sciences is going to consider for some of the master's program that they have, right? So a lot of students who took the test today were primarily taking it for the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, considering they stopped conducting the testnet and will be accepting CUET PG from now on. So we're going to talk about the cutoff as well in today's session. And the overall perception that we got right after the test was conducted from all the students that we spoke to, and some of us also ended up taking the test, was that the paper was overall easy, right? So if you look at or rather compare it with a lot of other tests that are out there, the paper was found to be considerably on the easier side. Of course, there were some differentiators in terms of VRC. So that is something that will determine really what will happen, right? So let's talk about things in more detail, right? So the first and foremost thing that I'm going to talk about is going to be the overall verdict, right, that we have. So this is what we believe should be the cutoff, somewhere in the range of 250 or more for the MA HRM program, right? So the flagship program that this offers, cutoff should be 250 or more, right? And the reason why I'm making that statement is, of course, in the analysis, you'll realize why I make that statement. A lot of questions were extremely straightforward. And the other thing is the duration, right? The duration was definitely more than what was required to complete those 75 questions. So if you have 75 questions and 105 minutes, and you give it like an easy paper, then it becomes a problem. So if they had kept, let's say, duration on the lower side, right, or if they had more number of questions, then that would have become a little more challenging. But then because they had more time and the number of questions were just 75, a lot of people we found that, and even at the center, I noticed that a lot of people were solving the paper comfortably, right? So they're going at a nice leisurely pace. A lot of questions you didn't have to hurry in any particular manner because you had ample time. So if you look at the past test selection process, and you look at testnet as a test, right? Even in testnet, what used to happen is a lot of times people used to have more time because out of 140 questions used to be GK. So even then, the 60 remaining questions, which were split between quant and verbal, people had ample time to do those questions. The same thing happened today in CUET PG as well, wherein you had a lot of time. You could have gone at a very nice pace and completed the paper, right? So overall, I think 250 or more is what you're looking at for the MA HRM LR program. Somewhere around 245, which would be possibly one or two question difference here and there, will make that difference in somebody getting into an HRM versus an ODCL, right? And then the labor studies and practice should be somewhere around 240, right? It could be slightly low because a lot of people don't prefer labor studies and practice. But then this year, because of the increased competition, right? So you have so many people, first of all, taking the entrance test this year. And that we have seen across all the tests, right? So you had some 30% increase in the number of CAT takers, right? ZAT takers went up by 40% or so. So because of this impact as well, that the number of takers has also gone up, that will also have an implication on the cutoffs, right? So that is why you may think that, okay, we are saying it to be slightly on the higher side, or some of you might think this is to be on the lower side. That's why we're saying 250 plus. It could be maybe a 252 or a 254 as well, right? We never know. So ultimately, there is no way to figure out how many questions people have attempted and all of that. And what also happens is that a lot of times, immediately after the test is conducted, there is a euphoria, right? So some people are very happy about their attempt. Some people are very sad about their attempt. So people tend to either overestimate or underestimate difficulty as well as their own performances, right? So you never know what the final thing would be eventually. But then 250 plus, right, is what HRMLR should be, because the paper was straightforward. And I think anybody who has taken multiple tests would have been in a very, very comfortable position. So just giving a quick overview, the test had no sectional breakup, and the 75 questions appeared in a jumbled manner except the VRC section. So I think it was true for everybody, where the first 25 questions were VRC, and the remaining 50 questions, which is the logical reasoning, quant, and data interpretation, that appeared in a jumbled manner. So some people had a lot of QA questions in the beginning, then a few, then one or two LR questions in between, then again QA question, then suddenly one DI set, and so on. So even I sort of started thinking whether it is questions from one area appearing together, but that was not the case, because I think for me, 61 to 65 was a DI set, and then a 71 to 75 was a DI set. Right? So again, for you, maybe the order was a little different. Now you had 105 minutes, and as I said, the time was ample, right? So 75 questions, especially when you have a lot of direct questions. For example, there was this question, right, in Quant, some of you may be able to recall that a particular tap empties a tank in 3 hours. To empty two-third, how much time it will take, right? And that straightforward questions were also there. A lot of vocab questions or grammar questions could have been solved in under a minute. So definitely time was ample. That was not a constraint today. The constraint is going to be whether you know a lot of those words, whether you have your grammar in place, and what your final accuracy is, right? So you may have made some silly mistakes here and there, right? And that always happens. So somewhere in the range of 80 to 85% accuracy. If you have more than that, nothing like it, right? So factoring in everything, we are saying somewhere around the cutoff that I said, right? 250 plus looks like a good number. Assuming, let's say, somebody attempted some 64 odd questions correctly, right? That would take somebody to a very comfortable position, first of all. And then maybe, let's say, 5 or 6 wrong questions that will still make you somewhere in the range of 250 or more. And that is how we have estimated the final cutoff, right? Now, the marking scheme +4 -1. So, of course, a lot of people could have taken a few chances here and there as well, because the upside is very high. Of course, there is also the downside, but then it depends on how you have performed overall, whether you should be taking risk or not. So overall, the LOD of the test was easy by any standard, right? So if you compare it with other tests, or if you look at it as a standalone test also, definitely can be classified as an easy test. So the area-wise breakup, as I said, you had 25 questions of VRC. Those were the initial 25 questions, and then the remaining 50 questions were jumbled. So they were quant, data interpretation, and logical reasoning. So within data interpretation, there were 10 questions, which I'll talk about as we progress. I think a good attempt in this paper would have been somewhere around 65 or more, right? As I can see in the chat window as well, some of you have mentioned, Shruti has mentioned it's 66, a good attempt. I can see Erkai Priyan saying 65 attempts with 4 or 5 doubtful, right? So those are good attempts to be. So if you have done 65 plus out of 75, I think that's a very good attempt. Overall, again, all the sections, all the areas that were there, I wouldn't call it sections because there was no sectional breakup. All the areas that were there individually were also easy, barring a couple of questions here and there, right? So even in VRC, for example, maybe you didn't know those few words, maybe you didn't know a few grammar questions, or you made some mistake. In quant, maybe 1 or 2 questions here and there, you maybe misread the question, or you were not able to get the answer. That could have always happened. But that does not change the fact that the actual difficulty of each of these was on the easy side. So let me now talk about the individual sections. Now, firstly, English comprehension, right? So when you look at the VRC, the English section that is there, there was only one passage with 5 questions on it. It appeared somewhere in between. I think it appeared somewhere around question number 16 to question number 20 kind of a thing. And that one RC, 3 paragraphs is what it had. So the duration, the length of the passage, right, wasn't very long. Just 3 paragraphs is what I noticed. Each paragraph had roughly around 4 or 5 sentences, right? So somewhere around 15 to 17 odd sentences is what the entire thing was. Now, here, the topic was unfair business practices of top technology companies. And if you're somebody who has read technology in the past, some of the questions could have been answered even without reading the passage, right? The technological obsolescence or planned obsolescence that one term I think is familiar to a lot of people who read technology, that there is this entire thing that you try to make your products redundant. So that was a fairly straightforward thing. But even otherwise, if you're somebody who's not a tech reader, just reading the passage because was sufficient, because a lot of questions were direct. So you just had to read and figure out whether something is mentioned or not mentioned in the passage. Which of the following is true or false kind of a thing. Those questions were also there. Some direct questions. So pretty much everything was doable with respect to that RC. The challenge was, of course, vocab and grammar. So if you're somebody who, for example, is good at vocab, you would have found this to be an easy area. But somebody who does not have great vocab would have found it slightly difficult. So vocab, for example, right, the word inimical. So I think those of your Harry Potter fans might remember those protection charms that are there in Harry Potter, right? Fianto Duri and so on. So there is one of the charms which has inimicum as the word, which is harmful, right? So protection against the harmful things. So maybe you may have recalled that thing during the test. But otherwise, a lot of these questions were direct. You don't have to spend too much time. Vocab questions are either you know it or you don't. You could have taken a few half chances. Okay. So there were some words where maybe you could have taken chance. For example, bohemian. Now, if somebody is familiar with that word a little bit also, you could have taken a chance, right? There were match the columns kind of thing, right? Match the pairs or something in the vocab section. So if you knew, let's say, one or two words out of the four words, you would have been in a position to connect the dots, right? So I think there was one where you had four meanings were given on the left hand side, then four words on the right hand side, and you had to match the thing. So even if you had maybe known one or two out of those, you would have been in a position to answer it. Okay. So that's how the 25 questions were. 5 questions of RC, 20 questions of vocab and grammar. If you look at the individual areas, synonyms, antonyms, 2 questions, FIB, 5 questions, match the word idiom, 2 questions, spotting the error, 2, jumbled paragraph, 3. And jumbled paragraph was very, very straightforward. So it was very easy to spot. There was nothing complicated about that sentence. Whatever sentences were there, very, very straightforward. Speech and voice-based questions may have been a bit challenging for people who are not used to it. So converting from active voice to passive voice. Idioms, one-word substitution, again, part of vocab. So either you know it or you don't, but then again, you could have taken some guesses. So for example, something related to moon, I guess, was there. So you know that, okay, moon is something which is very difficult to achieve. So maybe that is the connection there, right? And then finally, grammatically correct sentence. So everything which is vocab and grammar dominated this area. People who have comfort on vocab and grammar would have had a ball, right, in today's paper. So they were being very happy with their attempt, and especially people who have good vocabulary. Okay. But even then, I think RC was definitely doable. Out of these 20 remaining questions, people could have at least attempted a 14, 15 in my view, if you skip through some of the more difficult ones, right? All right. Let's move to next area, which was quant and DI. So in quant, everything was arithmetic. There was nothing related to number system, nothing related to algebra, no geometry, no permutation, combination, probability, right? So entirely arithmetic, and within arithmetic, dominated by time and work. So I noted 5 questions of time and work and 4 questions of time, speed, distance. Okay, so people who had practiced these 2 areas well would have easily got these 9 questions. And then the remaining were 2-3 questions each of percentage, profit loss discount, partnerships, SICI ratios, right? And direct questions. So something doubles in so much time, in how much time it will become, whatever, right? So those kind of things. So a lot of questions were extremely direct, except some of them. So especially on the DS front, there were questions which required a little bit of thinking and even calculations, because the options were very close. But then with careful attempt, somebody could have got all of it correct. Then there was one question on 3 set when very, very straightforward, just taking the total of the union, subtracting it from 1000, and then taking a ratio of the intersection of all versus the people who didn't like any of it, right? So that was the this thing. It was very, very straightforward. And then speaking of data interpretation. So within DI, there was a pie chart and there was a line graph. Now, pie chart, interestingly, you had values which were the 5 chocolate brands were given, and 10%, 20%, 30%, 15%, these kind of values were there. So very easy to work with values as well. The entire set could have been solved simply using those values, instead of converting it to absolute values. You could have converted to absolute values also, and you still would have had enough time to do the entire thing properly. And the questions were pretty straightforward. So if you take these two, combine them and take ratio with something else, what is the ratio? Or if the selling price of one or whatever, the price of one is this, the price of the other is this. And if you then buy so many, what will happen, right? Given the total expenditure. So very easy to calculate things within that pie chart. The line graph was slightly something that could have stumped a few people who are not very comfortable with DI, because it had the ratio of exports to imports for two companies for, I think, 6 different years, if I recall correctly. Some of the questions were very simple. For example, they had just asked in how many cases for a particular company, the exports is greater than the imports. Right? Now, if the ratio becomes more than 1, you know exports is greater than the imports. Right? So very straightforward logic in some of them. But in some of them, you had to calculate, right? So 40% increase given or 50% increase given in imports, then what will be the ratio of the old exports to the new imports? Again, nothing which is complicated. So it may happen that somebody solves that question in 10 seconds versus somebody takes maybe 1 minute to solve that question. But if whatever, both people will be able to answer that question. So it wasn't very, very difficult per se. So overall, that was the impression on the quant and DI area. Total 34 questions is what we were able to count. Now let's move to the third area, which is the logical reasoning, right? And within logical reasoning, two parts: non-verbal reasoning and verbal reasoning. Non-verbal reasoning was the dominant part. You had a few caselets. Again, one question on each of them, nothing very difficult. Sequential output. So there was no sequential output. We're sorry for that. I think it remained by mistake. Coding, decoding, directions, calendars, clocks also no appearance. So again, ignore that part. So the only thing that appeared, right, is LR caselets, coding, decoding, directions, blood relations, number series, symbol-based logic, and cube-based questions. Okay. So apologies for mentioning sequential output and calendars and clocks. There was no question on that. So the total 13 questions is what we had. And then within verbal reasoning, there were 3 questions. So cause and effect, reverse syllogism, and strong argument. Okay. The individual areas, if you look at it, linear arrangement 2 questions, number series 2, coding decoding 2, directions 2, 1 cube based puzzle. So 8 centimeter dimension cube is given, and then cut into pieces, which is 2 centimeter each. So how many will not have any face painted, right? So that was the question, very, very direct. Then blood relations. So within blood relation, there was one direct question, I think something related to my father's wife's daughter's younger brother or something like that. I think the answer was brother for that question. Then symbol-based reasoning. So comparison. So 5 symbols given, and then the interpretation of that. So greater than, equal to, less than, equal to, and all of that. And then finally, 3 verbal reasoning questions. So strong argument, reverse syllogism, which was on languages, I think German and some other language. And then one on cause and effect, right? Again, nothing out of the world. So people could have made a nice attempt. Even number series questions, the 2 questions which were there, with some effort, people could have got the answer. Again, the only difference was somebody can get it in 10 seconds, whereas somebody can take a minute. Again, both people would have been in a position to answer it. So time was not the constraint, and that is where the issue lies, right? So the issue with the test is this, that you have made it an easy test and you have given people more time to solve those questions. And because of which the distribution at the top will become very tight. So you'll have a lot of people who are sitting on a particular score. Right? So that's where the issue lies with the test. So finally, just to sort of conclude, overall, I think 250 plus is what we're looking at for the MA HRM LR program. For ODCL, that should be somewhere around 245 plus. And for MA Labor Studies and Practice, it should be somewhere around 240 or more, right? So that's about it. If there are any questions in the chat window, I don't mind taking them right now. So let me know if you have any questions, right? I think most of you just commented about your attempts. I don't think there is too much to talk about today's test. Most of the people would have found it to be a straightforward paper, right? Especially if you're somebody who has, let's say, appeared for CAT, ZAT, NMAT, SNAP, CET, etc. I think this would have been a cakewalk for a lot of people. But then I understand that there are a lot of people who are just preparing for, say, a CUET PG, right? In that case, maybe they could have found the paper to be a little difficult, especially if it was, let's say, your first real entrance test, right? But people who had, let's say, appeared for other exams would have found it to be pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's about it. I think with this, we can conclude this particular session. If you have any questions, you can always drop in a comment on this particular video. What is going to happen from here is, I think NTA has already mentioned that they will be releasing the question paper and the answer key. So we will be able to figure out how much raw score we are going to get. So they are going to release that, and there will be a challenge window. So that is something that happens for all NTA exams, where they open a challenge window. One thing that I want to say is that once they release the answer key, right, whatever questions where we don't agree with the answer key, IMS will challenge those questions. Okay, so we would suggest people not to challenge questions unnecessarily. Once they release the answer key, we will definitely float a form to capture any issues that you guys may have with the answer key. We, all of us, the academic team at IMS, will sit and solve the paper. And then if at all there are any challenges, we will do that. Okay. But let's see, let's wait for them to release the response sheet and everything. Okay. Will the key be released? Yes. So that is true for all NTA exams. They release the answer key as well as the paper, and there is a challenge window. Okay. So it should happen for CUET PG as well. Let's see when exactly they'll do that. But that's a standard practice that they have followed for all NTA exams. Anirban is saying the problem was with scrolling was there. It was annoying, not able to see the questions in a single space. I agree. Especially in RC, it was very painful. Even in DI, I think that was the case. Because see, a lot of quant questions, there was no scrolling involved. But for RC and data interpretation sets, there was that scrolling involved, which was irritating. I mean, there is no way to sort of read it in one go. So you have to scroll left, right to read the entire question. So that was irritating. I completely agree with it. When will the key be released? Shreya and Soumya, we don't know exactly. Let's wait for them to do that. Will tomorrow's exam be similar? So I don't know if the question paper 12 is happening tomorrow as well. If it is happening, then yes, but I think they've concluded the entire paper. I'm not sure if the question paper 12 is happening tomorrow. For social entrepreneurship program, okay, again, I think it is going to be fairly straightforward. So don't worry about it. Looking at how they have set this paper, I don't think any of the papers would be very challenging or something. So whatever prep that you have done, I think that should be sufficient. All right. So all the best to all of you. Thank you so much for joining. Wish once again, all the best to everybody. Let's wait for things to unfold. The answer key release, the response sheet release, and then the challenge, and then of course the final result. Okay. All right. Bye everyone. Take care.